Well, in the cellular respiration, every living cell need to use ATP as the energy source. So cellular respiration is to explain how to produce ATPs from the energy from the food you consume. So the energy source is ATP. And every living cell, when they use ATP, they will break the triphosphate bond. TP means triphosphate. Break the covalent bond between the phosphate group, and then the energy can be used by the cell. And then you produce the low energy molecule, which is the ADP. DP is a low energy molecule. And when you're resting, when you're not exercising, your muscle is not doing nothing. They will take the ADP. They'll take the ADP, low energy molecule, and add a phosphate group. And they need to use energy. And now they are ready to produce ATP. So tomorrow you can exercise again because your muscle have ATP. So that's one process to produce ATP. However, there are other processes, and that's our main focus. That's why we need to eat food. So you eat, especially carbohydrate. Your digestive system will cut the carbohydrate into simple sugar, and those simple sugar is glucose. And then your cells will take glucose in through the glucose carrier. That's the membrane transport we covered before. And once the cell have glucose, and they will use the glucose to produce ATP. So that's the main topic for today. That's the cellular respiration. So let's look at how to turn glucose into ATP. Totally, there are 4 processes, 3 main processes and 1 intermediate group. The first one is called glycolysis. That's the main process. That's the first process. And then we have an intermediate step. Let's turn the pyruvate into acetyl-CoA. And then the second big step is called the citric acid cycle, also called the Krebs cycle. And the last one is called oxidative phosphorylation. The old textbook called electron transport chain. So totally 3 big processes with 1 intermediate process. So totally 4 processes. And the goal is to turn glucose. This is glucose, 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen molecule into ATP. This energy is ATP. And you will learn how many total. So totally is actually 38 ATP. So it's 38 ATP. And byproduct, CO2 and water. That's why we breathe out CO2 and water. So you also breathe out vapor. You can put a mirror in front of your nose. You will find you actually breathe out vapor. And what's missing here? Missing here, you find you breathe in oxygen. So actually, they need oxygen for the process to happen. So every living cell breathes in oxygen, breathes out CO2. So breathe in, the missing one here is O2, and breathe out CO2. And that's why you breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2. That's the cellular respiration. Okay, so the energy comes from the food. They will be transferred. They need to be transferred into ATP, but in the several intermediate step, you find you will have proton or electron carrier, especially in the first few steps. You don't produce too many ATP, but eventually those electron and proton will turn into ATP. So the starting point, glucose. So this is the glucose molecule we covered before. Is 6 carbon molecule, 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen. And we have electron. So we talk about the atom molecule. This is the electron, right? And also, well, this atom is hydrogen because it has 1 proton, 1 electron. So when you take the electron away, this atom, not another atom anymore, this ion only have a positive charge, which is a proton. So we rewrite proton sometimes as proton, sometimes it's H plus. That's the reason. When the hydrogen lose electron, it becomes a proton. So in this topic, you will see a lot of protons. Sometimes they just write the proton, sometimes they write H plus. That's the reason. Because the hydrogen atom, when you lose electron, you start to carry positive one charge. If it's one, you can choose not to write one, right? So H plus. That's the proton. And electron we write as electron. So in the first few steps, you will see a lot of electrons, protons being transferred here and there. And we even have the electron carrier to carry those. There are vehicles to carry those electrons. And eventually all those electrons, protons in the last step, they will turn into ATP. Okay, so let's look at those electron carrier. They are called NADH and sometimes called NAD plus, the same. And then FADH2. So these two are electron carrier, especially in the first few steps. You will see a lot of NADH, FADH2. These two, we treat them the same. It's like they're both truck. It's like one is Toyota Tacoma, the other is Ford 150. Their job is they're the same. They just carry electron. So NAD plus or NADH, we just treat them the same. In the first few steps, you will see them, and their job is the electron carrier. Okay, and you will see a lot of chemical equation in this cellular respiration. So usually we write chemical equations from left to right, but in this case, you will see a lot of them is from up down, because you have so many. So they will write up down and then keep going down. So they can put several equations in one page. And if they have enzymes, they will write around not superior to this arrow, but on the right side. And sometimes you will see, oh, okay, an NADH show up here, you know, okay, they start to carry electron away. Okay, so they write down in up-down process, and you have the reactants and you have the product. So this is one chemical process. And from glucose become G6P, you just add a phosphate group, and you actually use one ATP in the first step. And then the second chemical process is from G6P to fructose 6P. So they just keep changing. They write it in the up-down sequence. Okay, so so far we know ATP can be produced in two ways. So the first way is you take ADP, that's the low energy molecule, and you add a phosphate group. And now you produce ATP, 3-phosphate ATP. And the second one is oxidative phosphorylation. That's one we're gonna focus. So this show you how to directly make ATP from ADP. So you add the phosphate into the diphosphate ADP, and now you have ATP molecule. And the other way, cellular respiration. So we're gonna focus on this, start from glycolysis, and intermediate step, turn the acetyl-CoA into pyruvate. Then the second big step is called the citric acid cycle, also called the Krebs cycle. And the last one, the third one, oxidative phosphorylation, also called electron transport chain. And to talk about the cellular respiration, we have to talk about mitochondria. Last time when we talk about the cell organelle, I told you mitochondria is a very important organelle in the cell. It's the fab to produce ATP. Like 95% of ATP is produced here. And in the whole cellular respiration, the first process, glycolysis, happens in cytosol. And the second, citric acid cycle, and the third one, oxidative phosphorylation, both of them happen in the mitochondria. So that's why 95% of the ATP come from mitochondria. The first glycolysis actually only produce 2 ATPs. So the second and the third totally produce 36. So most of the ATP actually come from mitochondria. Okay, so let's start. The first process, glycolysis. Glycolysis, its job is to turn a glucose, a big molecule, into a small molecule, into pyruvate. So one glucose, which is 6 carbon, it will turn into 2 pyruvate. So you can imagine pyruvate must be 3 carbon. So you can take a glucose and cut in the middle and become 2 pyruvate. So this process happens in the cytosol. So not in the mitochondria yet, in all these cytosol. This process is quick, even though you only produce 2 ATP, but it's quick and it's anaerobic. Anaerobic means you don't need oxygen for the process to happen. The other two, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain, you find they need oxygen. That's in the mitochondria. So this glycolysis process is quick, even though it produces not too many ATP and it does not require oxygen. Means when your body desperately need ATP, they will go through glycolysis a lot. And because they can quickly produce ATP, even though they don't produce a lot, but it's a quick process. Okay, now let's look at the detail. What I want you to know, there are so many reactants product here, and each arrow is one chemical interactions, a chemical reaction. So you have so many. What I want you to know, I want you to know the beginning and the end. I want to know the beginning and end. So there are several intermediate steps. When you take a biochemistry, you have to memorize each one of them. But for this class, I want you to know what's input, what's the beginning, glycolysis, and what's the output. What do you receive here? I will talk about the detail to explain what happens. But what I want you to know, what I will test you is what's the input, what's the output. Okay, so let's start. What's the input? Input is glucose, of course. So you're going to turn the glucose into pyruvate. Glucose is 6 carbon molecule. And you need to cut in the middle, become 2 pyruvate. So the first thing is you want to make them 2 symmetric molecule. One symmetric molecule, so you can cut in the middle. So all this process here, basically it just will make them left and right symmetric. So you take glucose and you add a phosphate group, become a G6P, and then you have G6P, and then you turn into fructose. You know, fructose, we talk about it, is another simple sugar. So glucose is simple sugar. You turn glucose into fructose. And then you add another phosphate. So now you find the left and right is almost symmetric, right? Almost symmetric. And each one has an enzyme to do the job. I won't test you those intermediate enzymes. And this process actually use ATP. So before you start, you actually use some ATP. And eventually they're almost symmetric. Okay, then you can cut them in the middle. And once you cut them, so you have two 3 carbon molecules. So that's glycolysis. And this 3 carbon molecule is called pyruvate. So the whole glycolysis is turn 1 glucose into 2 pyruvate. So you find actually you use some ATP. Yeah, you will produce some ATP, but you also use ATP. And you also produce NADH. That's the electron carrier. So that's the whole glycolysis process. You have the input, you have the output. So each intermediate step have an enzyme. So when you go to a 4-year university, when you take a biochemistry, we'll talk about the detail, what's the input, and for each step, what's the enzyme used. But here, I want you to focus on the input, which is glucose, and the output, 2 pyruvate. What else? 2 ATP, and 2 NADH. Remember, NADH is the electron carrier. Okay, so let's stop here.